Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
This just happened to me. Be me with shit job as admin assistant at a local county building. Always happy to help do all sorts of odd jobs, for example, gophering, sometimes even janitorial or maintenance work. Everything seemed a bit off yesterday. Had that weird, ethereal, dreamlike atmosphere, can't explain it. Be asked to help transport some inmates in a work release program back to what's known as the municipal center, courts, offices, etc., to drop them off. Not quite hardened inmates, but still, their hands are zip-tied for minimum security purposes. Told to meet drivers at the visitor center, which is highly unusual to have inmates this close to the public, even if under constant supervision. Drivers are two youngish guys like me, but very much the Jay and Silent Bob stereotype with that 90s vibe to them. Drivers are wearing county worker coveralls. Inmates are still in usual smocks for things like road cleanup work. We go to pick up an unmarked van, the kind used to transport county workers from the airport. Help load inmates into the van and begin to head to the municipal center. I sit just behind the driver in a sideways-facing jump seat. The rest of the inmates pile into bench seats behind me. During our drive, I am informed by the lead driver that we're not headed to the municipal center after all, but we're instructed to reroute the inmates to the county corrections facility instead. Not a big deal, not unusual. County Corrections Center on the same plot as the jail building on another side of town. We're driving for not very long, but I notice out the window that I am on a side of town I am not familiar with at all, just outside of the downtown district where I work. I am typically very good with directions, but for some odd reason my bearings are completely off, and I literally have no idea where we are or what direction we are going. I have no idea what streets we're on, and nothing around us seems familiar to me. Mind you, I grew up not far from the downtown district. We've only been driving for what seemed like 5 minutes, and I am completely lost. I feel anxious. Something is not right. Another strange detail. It was late afternoon when we left, but now for some reason the sun seems to be set very low on the horizon, and the sky is noticeably dimmer than it should be. The driver tells me that this job might take a while, and if we go past our usual work hours, there are multiple residential homes owned by the county that we could crash at. I tell him I need to get back to my locker at the county building to get my personal items, including my phone and backpack or laptop. The driver tells me that this job might take longer than expected, and that the county building will likely be closed before we could return to drop off the van. He kind of just ignores me and keeps pointing out different residential homes we could crash at. Not long later, the darkness of the evening sky is very pronounced. It's as if we were driving through a time warp. The side of town I'm on is also very oddly old, as in, not run down, but not modern. Also, the area of town seemed very sketchy. But I started to see some landmarks that show that we are close to the municipal center. The driver tells me that we aren't going to make it to the municipal center in time, so we are stopping by some residential home for a second. I have no phone on me and I'm riding in an unmarked van with several inmates. We pull up behind this big apartment complex, which is basically multiple 6-story townhouses all squashed together. I have no idea where I am, and this place and everything about it seems sketchy as hell. I am told to wait with the van while the drivers go talk to whoever is in charge of this facility. The lead driver tells me that I am not allowed to meet the people in charge. He made it seem like since they don't know me, I would make them nervous. The lead driver seems very pushy at this point, as if I'm his subordinate. I shrug and move to the driver's seat. The lead driver takes the keys with him. As he's walking away, he looks around and casually tosses the keys into a patch of tall, unkempt grass off to the side, then proceeds to head up a deck to a rear entrance. My blood runs cold. I have no idea where I am or what's going on, and I'm in a van with a bunch of inmates. The sun has also completely set, and it was getting darker by the moment. Before it gets too dark, I decide to quickly go over to find where the keys were discarded, making sure to lock all the van doors behind me. I find the keys, thankfully, and hurry back to the van. An uncomfortably long amount of time has now passed, and I'm halfway tempted to drive to the closest police station that I can find. After an awkwardly long time, the drivers return from the rear entrance flanked by 2 men. I shit you not, but they look like the stereotypical mobsters from Dick Tracy-era comics. The lead driver walks up to the van and tells me to get back in the jump seat. It is as if he knows I retrieved the keys from the grass because he gets right in and starts the van. We back the van up slowly down a driveway to a sunken garage entrance. The garage was unusually narrow, and the back of the van barely fit the width of it. The 2 drivers begin to escort the inmates out of the van and lead them up the driveway and around a corner to where I can no longer see where they're going. The garage door opens, and the garage is filled with old stuff like furniture and boxes and a bunch of things covered in black plastic trash bags. It was as if someone had moved in but never unpacked. The stuff was old and had been there for a very long time, covered in dust and cobwebs. I was told that I might have to help move some things, but to wait in the garage for further instructions. Another awkwardly long wait ensues. At this point, it was completely dark outside, and there is no lighting or windows in the garage. Even though it should have been early evening, it was completely dark out as if it were late at night, closer to midnight. At this point, I'm scared and frustrated, so I decide to leave. I notice that I'm kind of pinned in by the van and start to panic. The garage is old and separate from the residence, and there is no inside door, just the garage door that the van is blocking. Thankfully, the back door of the van is unlocked, so I crawl in over the rear seats and make my way to the front. I exit the van and walk up the driveway, but I instinctively head the opposite way from where the inmates were taken. I walk to where the front of the housing complex meets the road and look both ways. Both directions lead up a shallow hill, so I arbitrarily choose to head left up the road. The road is old and craggy, covered in dirt and gravel and flanked by weeds, as if it doesn't see any traffic. I make it up to a higher elevation and still have no idea what side of town I'm on or my general whereabouts, other than a general notion that we are vaguely close to the county correction center. I see a gas station up the road and hustle up to it. I tell the girl working there that I have an emergency and beg to use the phone. Without hesitating, she hands me the phone. I called one of my buddies to come get me. Thankfully, I remembered his number. I ask the girl working for the address, and she gives it to me. I start to feel better knowing my buddy is on the way to get me. I ask the girl what time it is. It's now been 6 hours since I left my job site. I go outside and sit on the curb, exhausted from the long walk up the road, and wait for my friend to come get me. After a long while, my buddy arrives. I asked him how far he had to drive from his place, which isn't far from where I live, just on the outskirts of the downtown district. He says not far. I asked him why it took him so long then. He wonders himself. I ask him if he's ever been to this neighborhood. He says even he is not familiar with this side of town. Like me, he's never traveled through this neighborhood and had no idea it was even there. But we are only several minutes away from where I work. A few things to note. Everyone at work seemed unusually nice to me that day for some spooky reason. I mean obsequiously nice out of nowhere, offering me food, asking how I was doing, etc. The inmates and the other driver were inexplicably silent during this entire ordeal. Only the main driver said anything the entire time. The inmates were unusually sedate and smelled gut-wrenchingly awful, as if they hadn't bathed in a long while. As I was walking up the road, I noticed there was literally no traffic anywhere, like no cars, no people out walking. In fact, at night, that entire neighborhood was essentially a ghost town. The place I work is closed over the weekends, so I won't be able to go get my stuff until this upcoming Monday. This just happened. I'm just now typing this from an old laptop my friend gave me. I am very scared to report this incident, as in scared for my life and have no idea what to do about it.
Got any theories about what was going on? What about your boss? Talk to anyone else from your job?
One thing about my job, we are kind of encouraged not to fraternize outside of the workplace. Like we never really have out-of-office events. Even so, I don't have my phone on me until Monday. I'm hoping to use this weekend to decompress from the experience. I haven't slept really at all since, and I can't get the look of those 2 gentlemen that came out that apartment complex out of my head. Something very off about those dudes. I still get chills replaying everything that happened, and I can't seem to shake that awful smell from the inmates. It still lingers, and I've showered twice since. I honestly have no idea. My friend thinks they were planning to kill me and those inmates if we didn't cooperate, but he can be a bit overly dramatic. I didn't feel safe at all, though, so maybe mentally I'm blocking out the thought that he might be right.
Decided to start my own thread, since I have several stories of my own experiences and I don't know how much I'll end up sharing or how interesting it will be. I'm not going to Greentext because I'm pretty ingrained in my personal style of writing, so bear with me, please. I'm going to start with my experiences and work forward, even though one of my friends, R, may have encountered one of the creatures earlier chronologically. I was dicking around on my Xbox 360 several years ago, mid-late 2009. My then roommate, G, was out front smoking. We lived in a decent-sized neighborhood, nice 2-story house. My room was right in the front of the building near the front door. G knocks on my window, tells me to get outside. I do so. He hands me a cigarette and jabs a finger upwards, and when I look, I see lights. Dancing lights, high in the sky, bouncing around without any reason. There's far too many to count, and they're as small as stars, but they're performing aerial acrobatics that would put the Blue Angels to shame, darting straight at each other and reversing direction without any change in velocity. G and I whip out our cell phones and call our friends, TW, RE, and TM. Everyone comes over except for TM. He's not interested in aliens, and he's the only one with a girlfriend, so I can't really fault him for wanting to come. So the 5 of us are standing outside of my house, calling our other friends and telling them to look up, wherever they are. Some see it, some don't. Now, on the road that runs behind my house, there's another house at the end of a fairly long driveway. The guy who lives there has 3 German shepherds. Bunch of furry assholes. He lets them out at night, and they somehow manage not to get run over by all the cars they run in front of. As we're scoping out this light show, one of these jerk-ass dogs goes tearing ass down the street, rounds the corner, and is out of sight. As I'm watching this, my friends begin shouting. I turn to see what's up, and a massive, dark shape is in the middle of descending behind the tree line at the far end of the street. The size of the trees and the thing, a large black diamond with some kind of long tail trailing behind it. And its orientation make it look like it is landing far out in the woods, a ways off the main road that runs by our development. R's phone goes off. It's his mother. She tells us this thing has just gone soaring silently over their apartment complex. I can't remember if they learned anything else from her, because all I heard at that point was that damn dog letting out a death knell. Everyone is losing their shit in the least frightened way possible, whereas I'm about to crap my pants. The lights in the sky have begun to wink out, leaving just the stationary stars. My friends eventually decide to check it out, but it's not an immediate decision. Some of us, me and R, are pretty hesitant. We take a drive down that main road. Our neighborhood is off on our right, and the woods are to our immediate left. The closest house to those woods is TW's. There's a helicopter soaring over the densest part that we could see, spotlight running. Couldn't tell if it was military or not, but it wouldn't be surprising, what with the Air Force base being 10 minutes away. Besides that, we were getting the sense that whatever had happened, we'd seen the last of it for the night, so we went our separate ways. This had all started around 11 p.m., and it was now just before midnight when I'd made it back home, I think. Me and G sat around, talked a bit, and tried to relax. Around 1 a.m., G gets a call from a very excited TW who is already on his way. TW says that something had been stalking around his house, tapping on the windows, the doors, and stepping on the roof. He described a blank white face peering in through the glass, obscured by the blinds and curtains, but giving off a faint light, enough to be visible through the obstructions, and he asked for us to come with him. We oblige, mainly because what kind of dick would say no when a friend was in danger? Not much later, we are cruising down the road his house sits on, when TW slams on the brakes. A blur shoots across the street, scales the street lamp, and sits there for a moment. It's all pale white, lanky, clinging to the metal pole, before pushing off with all its limbs and disappearing in the darkness over another house. We collectively lose our shit and try another roundup of friends. R shows up about a half hour later. No one else is available. The four of us come up with a plan to make sure TW's house is clear before deciding what to do next. We end up splitting into pairs, R and I looking around the house, G and TW scoping out the surrounding area of the house where the creature had disappeared over. It was on this patrol that R and I saw it. We were standing in the area between TW and his neighbor's house, looking out across his yard and through the sparse trees over the tall grass just before the woods started. It was tall. That was apparent even with its hunched-over stance, like it was sneaking around in the trees. It moved carefully but still looked pretty unsure of its steps, stealthing from tree to tree. We could see its shoulders and head clearly over the 7-foot-tall grassweed, whatever the plants they were called. R and I were huddled beside a bush that was growing in the corner made by the outer wall of TW's neighbor's house and their fence, watching it. And then it stopped. It turned its head. And it looked at me. And I was afraid. So completely frozen. Afraid. The face was blank, like TW had said. It was all white, like I had seen on the power lamp. Lanky, tall, the head angled right in our direction, and I could feel it looking at me. Whether what we saw was just some kind of suit or they used some kind of other sense to see. But it feels the same way when you and another person's eyes catch because one of you were staring for too long, and all you feel is surprise for that split second before you realize what you need to do. It must have figured that out before me, though, because it retreated into the woods with an uncanny speed. That was the last we saw that night. It wasn't until we began going in a woods after these things that we figured out other things about them, like their hands and feet. It wasn't until the next afternoon that the five of us regrouped. Again, without TM. We wanted to see what we could see in the daylight. Maybe find the ship. It was mostly lighthearted, armed with a single 20-gauge shotgun and several pellet rifles, and enough cigarettes to last a week. We crossed into the woods behind TW's house, using the raised ground path that cut through the tall grass. E was leading us around, shotgun in hand. G and TW had pellet rifles. R and I were mostly just making stupid Sean Connery voices to pass the time. E was a redneck, born and raised in South Carolina, and the rest of us came from different parts of the country and had varying woods experience. I was a Florida swamp kid, but I was never interested in the outdoors much. The only thing of note we really came across on this particular expedition were these twisted up thin red filaments that had various twigs, leaves, and even a few mushrooms tied into them and hung from the tree branches. That night, however, we went back. So we got back out around midnight-ish this time, after spending 2 hours looking at the night sky for any activity. There wasn't any, so we just went back into the woods. We crossed through the tall grass along the same path as before, and we got around the same location where R and I had seen the creature staring at us, and headed straight into the woods from there. We walked for about 15 minutes, everyone armed with flashlights and pellet rifles. I had this compact lantern that I was hanging from the barrel of my rifle, keeping the light source behind my head and in the air. Worked beautifully, really, cast a nice little circle of vision for us. I had to take up the rear, unfortunately, because the lantern would blind the shit out of everyone in the darkness. So around that 15-minute mark, not terribly far into the woods really, we began to hear noise, rustling in the brush, twigs snapping on the ground. At this point, E makes a point of saying that we are surrounded, and we were. The sounds, the crunching footsteps were deliberate and definitely drawn out, coming from every direction. So naturally we assume aliens. It would have been a jump, and it probably was, until we heard the vocalizations. It sounded like a small waterfall, and then several of them carrying these tones of aggravation, like a snarl. The snarls were coming from everywhere, in the bushes, deeper into the woods, up in the trees above us. We couldn't talk to each other. We couldn't hear ourselves think. I couldn't at least, but everyone claims to have heard the same thing. For the first time, we were all scared, not just me, and we noped like a bunch of bumbling idiots. I was about to start blubbering when the waterfall snarls finally went away, so we beat a careful retreat back to TW's. He asked us to spend the night. We all collectively told him to go fuck himself, but after some pleading, R gave in and stayed behind. E drove G and I home. We stepped out of E's car, and E sped off home. G and I smoked some cigarettes for a bit before heading back towards the front door. Soon as we step onto the grass of the front lawn, we hear it again. Just one this time. A gurgling water sound coming from the roof hanging over the front door. The thing was crouched there, just looking at us. It took off shortly after we spotted it. G and I decided that it was warning us we knew where they lived. Now they knew where we lived. We rushed inside when it was out of sight and the sound had stopped. I wanted to call TW and R, tell them what happened. G said to wait. I texted R anyway and then headed to bed. We couldn't mobilize the next day and I didn't really want to. G and I took a ladder out of the garage and climbed onto the roof, checking out the tiles. But besides a few cracked tiles, nothing of real interest. I guess you could claim the tiles were broken by the creature's retreat, but there's no way of proving that, because neither of us really climbed on our roof much. We ended up making weekly trips into the woods, but never coming across much. And when we did, it was hard to really connect them with the creatures. More of those red filament twines, various things tied into them, mostly just twigs and leaves like before, sometimes small animal bones picked clean. We came across a deer skeleton at one point, just laying in the fringe of the tree line, picked clean, completely white. There weren't any tools around, nothing to carve the animal on, no tarp or anything, and it was way too perfectly white. No flesh, no blood. Months later, we would find another skeleton outside of R's apartment complex, but that would be long after our last woods expedition. It gets a bit weirder soon. We decided to go on a serious hike, me, G, TW, and E, deeper into the woods than we had ever gone and stay the night. We packed some provisions and ended up hiking about 2 miles into the forest. On the way up, I thought it might be fun to try recording with my new cell phone. It was the same one that Robert John Downey Jr. had in the beginning of the first Iron Man movie, but it didn't have any of the cool features his did lying sack of shit movie. I'd only managed to record like 2 minutes of us walking when the screen went pink and the speakers popped. I had to manually remove the battery to shut it off, and it wouldn't start up again, so we were suddenly down a phone. We had traded up our pellet guns for some actual rifles belonging to E and TW's dad. By some, I mean 2, and I didn't get one. At some point, while we were trekking along beside a small ravine-like thing next to the trail, we heard some more of that same serious movement, but it was different. It was somehow heavier. We looked out into the trees and we see dust and leaves swirling around, kicked up by something. We tried to find a way to cross this little ravine, but it was deep with mud, and I guess we were all too pussy about having to sleep in shitty jeans that night, so we didn't. But we did see something, blue through the trees, stalking around on 2 legs. We were going to shoot at it, but it was gone with a jolt, and another trail of dust kicked 4 feet into the air. About an hour on this trail, and we dipped straight into the woods, walking until we were 2 miles deep and finally setting up camp. It was pretty unspectacular, which we were kind of bummed about, so we ended up spending the night talking about the shit we experienced up till then, and eventually heading to bed, everyone taking a watch over the night. My watch was first. Nothing happened. I woke up G when it was over, and then went to sleep. I was woken up early in the morning by TW and E. They had 2 things to show me, the footprints and the compound. They'd found the compound first, but the footprints were everywhere. All throughout the campsite and the surrounding areas were circular holes about 2 inches thick and 5 inches deep, paired together like toes that punctured the ground. Admittedly pretty weird, I can only surmise that they would walk slowly and take their time, pushing a pair of long toes into the ground. Every now and then there would be the splayed-out handprints mixed in, but those were mostly around our campfire. E and TW lost their shit when they came across the campsite like that, because apparently the three of them had gone off together while I was sleeping, and they left G by the compound. So we had to collect ourselves, nut up, and check out this new mystery. While we walked, they explained what they had seen. After E's shift, he'd woken up TW to stand watch and proceeded to go off into the woods, leaving TW, G, and myself at the campsite. He came upon a pretty huge clearing, the edge of the woods possibly, but it was still too dark for him to tell at the time. But he did see a vehicle, sitting on a dirt road, with a large concrete square sitting in its headlights, with a single metal door. He heard men talking, and claims that two guys with submachine guns had exited the Jeep, stepped over to the metal door and waited. The door opened, sliding into the concrete, and closing shut behind them. He went back to get TW, but found that G was also up. The three of them went back as dawn was breaking, and found two Jeeps outside of the concrete building. G stayed behind to watch from the woods while TW and E came back to get me. Well, they did. And I got there. And it was there. A solid concrete block sitting in the middle of fucking nowhere, with a dirt road winding through nowhere, and a single Jeep sitting outside. G explains that the second Jeep had left. We sat there and watched for about a half hour when the metal door slid away and a single guy got out of the building, climbed into the Jeep, and drove away. We approached the building once the Jeep was long out of sight. It was absolutely featureless besides the door, which had no handles. We couldn't see any keypad or camera either. So we've come to the natural conclusion that the government is roaming these woods or perhaps underneath it. The concrete block was big, but it wasn't big enough to comfortably house 4 armed men and at least one more mystery person who was opening the door for the others. We headed back. A few days later, G and I were sitting in TM's. You remember TM. He was the only one who didn't want anything to do with the aliens truck, talking about all that we had seen, when suddenly TM slammed on his brakes. Now TM was driving a Ford Ranger, with only 2 actual seats, and these 2 weird side seat things behind those. I was in the side seat, and I didn't actually catch what they saw, but they both claimed to have seen a bright blue-white sphere in the sky, falling slowly, before erupting into a huge, roiling ball of light and disappearing. One more for you guys. Then comes the little epilogue about our return to the compound. Now, at the time that all of this had started, construction was starting near our neighborhood. A Lowe's was going to go on the corner of 2 main roads, so the workers were clearing out the trees and tearing up the soil. It took us several weeks to come to this conclusion, because we hadn't thought about connecting these events at the time. But one night long ago, R was walking home from my house and saw a pale, white figure in the tree line right where the Lowe's would be going. After thinking about it, we thought maybe the creatures had made their home in that section of the woods, only to be spooked off by the construction crew. So, G, TW, and I decided to check out the construction site. At night, we found the filaments in the trees surrounding the cleared-out site, except instead of twigs and bones, steel nails were tied up in them. Several of the construction vehicles had holes punched straight through their windshields. We had previously been hoping the creatures were frail, fast, but this was evidence to the contrary. Or vandalism, maybe. We were just finishing our roaming when we heard an ear-splitting screech from the woods. It was something. I don't know how to explain it, really. G says it sounds like a monkey and a cat trying to fight each other at the same time, but neither one wants to give up. He's colorful like that. So yeah, nothing else terribly eventful happened at the construction site that I can recall. We eventually beat feet out of there. That was the last real experience I had with the creatures. A few weeks after the construction site, we convinced R and TM to come with us out to the compound, as we began calling it. We trekked out to the woods and found the concrete block, but this time, something was different. It was all wrong, just completely wrong. The metal door was gone. We went inside. There was nothing. No furniture, no fixtures, no electrical outlets, no stairs, no elevators. Just 4 concrete walls, a concrete floor, and a metal roof. No pipe installations, no hinges for the door, no slot for the door to disappear into. Just a lot of concrete. There you have it. I've got other paranormal adventures, but this is the extent of my alien encounters. You are free to make it what you will. It's also my only real in-a-wood story.
Your story is weirder than most. I don't have any normal explanations for it except this part, which is kind of silly to try to explain away anyway given the context. The guys at the concrete place with guns may have been metal scrappers, given that it seemed to have been dismantled between your trips there. The red filaments in the woods. Did you keep any? Were they biological, chemical, or what? It seems important to me to find out what they were. Any recordings of the noises made by these creatures? Any photographs? There seem to have been a multitude of chances to get physical evidence from what you've described. Other than that, totally freaking bizarre and doesn't really fit into anything except demonology. There aren't a lot of stories like this. The helicopter and light does fit a common pattern of military investigation of high strangeness. The juxtaposition of the UFO with the ground-based humanoids is rather common as well, and obviously nonsensical, which is common too. Why would space visitors come to tie things up with strings and hang around on your porch, yet you saw and heard multiple somethings?
Yeah, I don't know. We came up with our own theory as to what was going on. The creatures may have been inhabiting the woods where the Lowe's was being erected and proceeded to flee when the construction crews began tearing up trees. Maybe the military got airborne before the last of them could escape, and they had to lay low. But my friends and I kept butting in on their business. We did take some of the filaments, but this was years ago, and I'm not sure who has the collected evidence at the moment. We did test them out. They were some manner of metal, but they had the pliability of hair. They reflected light at the knots, but could be worked unlike any manner of metal thread I've ever dealt with. The only attempt at recording things was when I tried to use my, at the time, brand new cell phone to capture some video, and it died within 2 minutes. The phone eventually came back on when I made it home and plugged it into the charger, but the whole situation was odd. I'm not sure about metal scrappers, because when I say the inside of the building was bare, I mean it. There were no holes where metal could have been, nothing plied out, and it was in the middle of nowhere. Also, the door opened on its own, as far as we could see. It honestly seemed like anything inside was filled in with concrete when it was removed.
I worked as a night watchman during the conversion of USN Recruit Depot San Diego to a civvy shithole scam property called Liberty Station. I previously went through boot camp there too, at a time when offing yourself was at an all-time high. One of the heroes was in my boot company, a kid who was quiet, pretty average in most ways, but athletics, where he was pretty much a college talent Chad. I knew him well. I was the athletic PO. Navy assigns people to little command jobs within the company to keep discipline and instill a desire to advance. It was pretty natural for me to want to walk through my old barracks, of course, and I did. I checked out all the nooks and crannies we had used to stash shit and found all kinds of micro-loot. I made one pass through every barracks and building in a given shift. The range, though. I remember he had been in the extra PT night torture for when you fuck off in boot. He was sent every night for a week for calling a Filipino a flip. Every time he came back, no matter how well he behaved and performed, the Filipino chief company commander sent him for another day and made a point of announcing it. We were at the range firing down caliber training .45s when we all heard shouting, and I saw someone fall to the floor in dungarees. He shot himself through the roof of the mouth. A buddy of mine told me as he was trying to fire at the target in front of him, the chief was telling him he would never graduate, etc. Typical boot-hardening bullshit. But after a week of extra PT, bread and water ration every other day, and constant abuse, he broke hard. I hated the chief anyway. He was an asshole. They pulled his ass and sent him back to the fleet, and the other CC made it a point to tell us how proud he was of how we handled the death and paid respects, etc. I knew he was there still. I never mentioned this experience to my employers. One of my fellow watchmen happened to be a Marine vet who I had met in the Post-Deliberate Force Stabilization Force in Bosnia. He caught up with me at lunch, usually when we worked the same day, and we got along well. I had never said shit about Winters or the Armory Range building. He just one night out of the blue said, "I almost radioed you in the other night. Someone was calling your last name out at the pistol range. I know your voice, so I know it wasn't you. I hit the lights. The place was empty. Weird shit, man." I tried to tell him one of the fat manpower people was screwing with the PA and did not know our names and faces, but he told me the system had been stripped out days before, but we agreed it was one of the rent-a-losers from the warm bodies supplier. That night, I had a change of heart. I was in a good mood, had finished the semester with a 4.0 and gotten transfer admission on all my Navy credits for my computer science and electrical engineering studies. I was breezing the site, shooed off a homeless group with kind words and no threats and floating, but I fell to earth in the armory. I stepped into it and it was cold in the middle of July. There was no AC, windows were gone, it was hot that night everywhere else. Perry. I knew the voice but ignored it. Imagination. But my feet felt fucking heavy. Perry? APO Perry? I went cold and stiff now too, but I forced myself to turn to the voice. Nothing. I got pissed and walked over to see if there was a speaker or something and realized I was in a firing lane. That firing lane, #11. "Winters, if that's you, you have to leave now," I said gently as I could. "They're tearing the place down." Silence. I stood there a long time looking at the floor where he died until I saw a flashlight bobbing around in the dark. My Marine buddy walked up. "Dude, your radio is live. That's crazy. Who the fuck is Winters?" I told him over drinks later. Winters was a decent person, if not all that brilliant. I actually believed I was having some kind of PTSD waking dream shit when I heard my name. When my buddy told me later he heard all of it, including my name, over the radio, I was speechless. I don't believe in much, but ghosts or manifestations or whatever, I know now. The Marine friend I mentioned tells that story every time he introduces me to people now. To me, he was always this crazy, fearless squid radio guy I knew in Bosnia, but there he was, literally froze up, staring at the floor, etc. I never did tell that tale myself before sharing it here. Let's just say I am not no for flights of fucking fancy or twee bullshit.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.